Thank you very much for the welcome. I really appreciate the work of Christian values in education, which is so important today. Want to speak to you about God's incredible design in hands and feet. I've been studying the biomechanics of hands and feet for over 30 years, and it's been a very humbling experience because the more you look into the incredible design of our hands and feet, you see the wonder of God's handiwork. Why is this so important? Well, you may have heard of this person, Alice Roberts, Professor of the Public Understanding of Science, who often appears on BBC. She often promotes evolution. She teaches children that humans have come from apes. She's also been the vice president and even, I think, the president of Humanists UK, but she claims not to have an agenda, which is quite interesting. This is one of her books, and in the book she says every part of our body has been shaped by ape to man evolution. If you want to understand your body, you must understand you are an ape, and that is what she teaches children in schools today. She says we are not shaped by God, we are an accident of nature, and she spends a lot of time lobbying Parliament. She was the one who lobbied that private Christian schools should not be allowed to teach creation, even in a private Christian school, alongside science lessons. So there's a real battle going on today, and hence the importance of Christian values in education. I'll talk about, firstly, the unique human hands, then the human foot, and then a little bit at the end, some interesting news about Darwin's iconic homology argument, which is so often taught, or always taught, in state schools today. Skillful hands and the Bible. The Bible mentions the skill of human hands. A lovely verse in Exodus 35. All the women who were gifted artisans spun yarn with their hands. What's interesting, when you read the Bible, it says not only has God designed us fearfully and wonderfully made with skillful hands, but God also gives certain gifts. He gives the gift of music, the gift of art, the gift of engineering. That comes out in the Bible. In Psalm 137, the psalmist speaks of the skill of his right hand. And in Psalm 8, it speaks of the work of God's hands, obviously metaphorically, but hands, they are there for skill, and our hands are certainly skillful. The importance of a Christian world view. Why do we have skillful hands? It's very clear from the Bible that our hands are there for skill, for knitting, for music playing, for craft work. Do you know what children are taught today? Do you know what students are taught? If you do a degree in zoology, do you know what students are taught is the purpose of your hand? What students are taught today is your hand has evolved to form a fist and punch someone in the face. That is the purpose of your hand, which is not a very good thing to teach children just before they go to the playground. That is the purpose of your hand, to punch someone in the face. You can even find scientific papers. I just have one example here. Protective buttressing of the human fist, Journal of Experimental Biology. There are academics being paid to write papers to describe how our hand formed a fist, and it's meant to punch someone in the face. Do you see the importance of a Christian worldview? When Alice Roberts said, you have to understand evolution to understand the human body, that's the kind of thing she meant. If you want to know what your hand is for, it's for punching. It's not for playing the piano. How uninspiring is that? No wonder we're struggling to produce J.S. Bach and those great musicians who in past times were inspired by a biblical world view. By the way, if you want to know why is it that we can form a fist, it's so we can hold a squash racket and play that brilliant sport. There are purposes in a power grip, but it's not forming a punching fist. Did you know how skillful human hands are? Let me just give you some examples. If you're a pianist, you probably learned a chromatic scale, playing all the notes of the piano. Top pianists can play 15 notes per second with one hand, playing the chromatic scale. That's a big challenge to evolution. How can the evolutionists say, well, we could only survive if we could play a chromatic scale at 15 notes per second? That doesn't really make sense. And there are lots of other similar problems. Did you know there's an Olympics for knitting? And the world record, this Dutch lady, it's always a lady who wins the Olympics for knitting, they see how many stitches can you make in 60 seconds. I could make about one, but this Dutch lady made 118 stitches in 60 seconds. Each stitch requires something like 15 movements. That's like 1,000 movements in 60 seconds. It's quite astonishing. How many characters can you type on a mobile phone per second? For me, it's about one. But for young teenagers, I think teenagers always win the Olympics. There's a competition. But it's 10 characters per second on a mobile phone. Our fingers are designed with great skill in mind. And it's a great challenge to the evolutionist. I'm going to attempt to describe to you some of the anatomy of the human hand. It's very difficult to do. You cannot do justice with diagrams. It is the pinnacle of mechanical design. This is a picture from Gray's Anatomy. In brown color are the muscles, in white are the tendons. So this is the tendons and muscles. This is the back of the hand. The secret to the hand is that it is a precision cable-driven system. It's a little bit like your bicycle. Your bicycle, you have these long cables in sheaths, you pull the brake, and a long force is transmitted through a long cable. And that's basically what happens on your hands. Most of the muscles for your fingers are in your forearm. In fact, if you do lots of movements with your fingers, you can see muscles contracting in your forearm. So you have these long tendons. It's a cable-driven system. It keeps your hands slender because the muscles are somewhere else, and it puts great skill, and it means you can have many tendons on each finger. I have produced robotic hands, and that has taught me how inferior human engineering is. I've had to study the anatomy of the human hand, which is very humbling, and I've had to come to terms with the fact that I cannot copy the human hand. No engineer can copy the human hand. In fact, no engineer or scientist even fully understands the human hand because you have this wonderful network of tendons. It's what's called a tensegrity system, and it's so complex engineers do not fully understand it. But I'm going to attempt to teach you a few things. The human hand has some unique features. We have an opposable thumb to each finger. Apes can't do that. We even have a tripod grip to hold a pen. We have a flexible palm and wrist, and we have very fine muscle control. We have 14 finger bones, and they are independently controlled by tendons, which is what I'm going to try and explain. Now, here is a diagram I've done of a finger. It's a simplified diagram. Don't worry if you don't understand it. But what it is illustrating is that each one of your fingers has 6 tendons. So each one of your fingers is moved and manipulated by 6 muscles. And the muscles are connected by tendons to your finger. And the reason it's mostly tendons, it keeps your fingers slender. Now, you don't realize this, but when you move your fingers, your brain is tugging different tendons with different forces. And as a child, you learn combinations of forces to move combinations of tendons. You can do very complex movements, but you're not really thinking about it because your brain just instructs. If you watch a child grow, I've got 6 grandchildren, I'm fascinated to Watch how they develop. A 1-year-old does simple flexion, simple grasping. But as they become 2 and 3, they start to do more complex movement. It takes years to learn how to tug these tendons. If you're technically minded, what you'd be interested in is that there are 2 tendons to the last finger bone. Then there are 2 tendons to the second finger bone and 2 tendons to the first finger bone. 1 on the top, 1 on the bottom. That means each bone can be independently controlled, and it's the secret to the great skill of the human hand. And it's these features that are so precise that engineers cannot copy them, because these tendons, I haven't drawn it, but these tendons slide within synovial sheaths with lubrication. There are also tunnels and pulleys that enable the tendons to work smoothly. So precise, cannot be copied by engineers. Well, on the left is the back of your hand. If you look under the skin, that's what you would see. On the right is the palm of your hand. In Gray's Anatomy, he dissects each finger differently, so you can see different things. You can see sheaths, you can see tendons splitting, you can see there are other muscles in the palm of your hand. The complexity is absolutely mind-boggling. I have worked on the design of spacecraft, and no spacecraft can match the complexity of the human hand. There's more engineering in your hand than there is in the James Webb Telescope. I'm going to show you how you can produce these different movements. Your hands are designed for skill. They're not designed as a punching machine, as children are taught today. So, on the bottom of your hand, on the palm, you have 2 sets of tendons. And this is what happens when your brain pulls a tendon. Do you see how it pulls the fingers down by pulling that muscle? Then you have a tendon on top of your fingers, and that extends your finger. So your brain pulls it down, and then on pulling a different tendon, it then pulls your finger up. So this is the long extensor tendon. This is just one pair of tendons. So you can do full flexion for holding that squash racket with a good grip. But then you can do a half flexion. Some of you will be better than others, depending on whether you're a musician or an engineer. God has made it so we can do a half flexion, not just a full flexion. And for that, your brain pulls a different tendon, because now it's pulling a tendon that goes to your second bone. You see, previously, it was pulling the long tendon that went to the last bone, but your brain can pull a shorter tendon to the other bone. But then your brain can also do a knuckle flexion and a knuckle extension. You can bend your fingers at the knuckles. And in some musical actions or other artistic work, you want to do all of these different flexions by tugging different tendons. This time, it's tugging a tendon right next to the knuckle. So you're beginning to see how the brain can tug these different tendons to do different things. The motion that astonishes engineers, really, engineers are in awe of this particular motion. When you do a push-retract motion, particularly when you're pressing a key on a piano, this is an astonishingly complex motion, but your brain just does it automatically. This is one, if you ask your 2-year-old or 3-year-old, they won't be able to do this one. It takes them several years to learn how to tug the different tendons. Once they've done it, once they've learned it, it's then easy. But you ask a young child and they can't do it. This one pulls a special tendon just in front of the knuckle, and it simultaneously flexes the knuckle and extends the other joints. This is what astonishes engineers, because the previous slides, each joint was either flexion or extension, but this movement combines flexion and extension at different joints, simultaneously flexing the knuckle and extending the other joints. Engineers thought that's impossible to do that, but we can do it with this astonishingly complex system. To do this, the brain has to tug lots of tendons with exactly the right ratio of forces to produce this movement. And until sometimes a child is 6 or 7 before they can really master this movement. But once the brain's got it, the brain memorizes the muscle movements. And it just seems so natural, but it's a very complex movement. We can also do a sideways movement, not just forward, back, but sideways, abduction, adduction. Then one more astonishing movement is circumduction. When you do a circular movement, you are basically pulling 4 muscles, one by one sideways, one forwards, one backwards, one sideways the other way. But not only are you moving 4 muscles all in line, but the brain gradually increases the first muscle, then gradually increases the second, gradually increases the third, so you get perfectly smooth movement. If you ask a robot to do it, it'll do a jerky movement, unless you get a brilliant engineer to put a control algorithm to make it smooth. We are doing astonishingly complex movements, but our brain makes it seem so easy. God has designed us to be brilliant with our fingers. We have precision control because of numerous units within our muscles. I love this verse. All the women who are gifted artisans spun yarn with their hands. I had that earlier. I can guarantee no one will build a robot that can match the knitting capabilities of a human. I could probably beat a robot now with my 1 stitch per minute. Robots just cannot do this type of skillful thing. Well, the hand is the pinnacle of mechanical design. Very close behind the hand would be the foot. The foot, one of the most beautiful parts of your body, and another pinnacle of mechanical design, fearfully and wonderfully made. On the left is a human arched foot. It's like a Roman stone arch. It even has a keystone at the top, just like a Roman stone arch. On the right is an ape flat foot. It is completely different. Sometimes you hear in the media, a chimpanzee is only 2% different to a human. If I'm debating a biologist and they say to me, how much do you think a human is different to a chimpanzee? I think it's 2%. Do you think it's 2% or 3% or 4%? And I say to them, I know exactly what the answer is. It's 100%. We are 100% different to chimpanzees. We have an arched foot, they have a flat foot. We're bipedal, they're quadruped. And I go through a list of 20, 30 things where we are completely and utterly different to a chimpanzee. The problem is they're looking bottom up from the DNA. I look top down from our capabilities, and I insist we are 100% different to chimpanzees. What is amazing about the human foot, I've published papers last year on prosthetic robotic feet, copying the human foot, trying to copy the human foot. And what is remarkable about the human foot is that it is multi-functioning. It's a structure for standing, it's a stiff lever for running, becomes a flexible structure for landing, and it has to hold the entire weight of the whole body. Even though you can get a prosthetic hip or a prosthetic knee, you cannot get at the moment a prosthetic ankle. Why is that? It's too difficult to copy. Engineers are not able to even produce a simple copy of the ankle or the foot. Last year, I published in the Journal of Biomimetics one of the most advanced prosthetic feet, one that copies a number of features of the human foot, but it's still hardly matching any of the capabilities of the human foot, as I shall explain. It's a remarkable multifunctioning structure. One of the most difficult things to copy in the human foot is that the foot can be both stiff and flexible at the right time. When you push off, when you're walking or running, your foot stiffens up, really stiff. For a heavy male, the Achilles tendon can withstand over a ton of force. But when you land on your foot, it suddenly becomes very flexible, and it's a shock absorber when you're landing. You don't think about this, but your brain automatically adjusts the muscles and ligaments. And it's that fine-tuning of stiffness which engineers find so difficult to copy in the foot, as well as other things. So we have this ingenious design, 3 integrated arches. This is why Leonardo da Vinci, the great scientist, said the human foot is a work of art and a masterpiece of design. And he's been proved right by modern studies. So you have a medial arch in your foot. That goes through the big 3 toes, shown in red. And that medial arch through the first 3 toes, that's your stiff arch and a springy arch when you're running. It's like a spring. It helps you to spring forwards. But then you have a lateral arch, the second arch. That goes through your 2 smallest toes. You land on your lateral arch, and then you roll over and pronate onto your medial arch. And then you have a transverse arch, which integrates the other 2 arches. By having 3 arches, it gives you 3-point contact with the ground, which is the perfect physical interface with the ground. It's an absolutely ingenious design, very complicated with 26 bones. But it's this ingenious design that makes it multi-functioning. Engineers had never thought of this until they discovered it in the human foot. It's an absolutely ingenious design and unique, totally different to apes. This causes the evolutionists to lose sleep and really scratch their heads. Where did this come from? There is no evidence whatsoever of this gradually evolving in the fossil record. And it cannot evolve because you cannot evolve a Roman arch. Every single stone has to be there from the beginning. You cannot evolve it step by step. So let's just quickly go through those functions. Firstly, for standing. A human can easily stand on one leg. This is something apes cannot do because they don't have this 3-point contact with the ground. Stand on one leg, you just put the center of gravity through those 3 points on the ground, and we can do that because of the triple arch. Apes cannot stand on one leg. They cannot stand on the balls of their feet. They cannot play any sport that humans can play because they cannot stand on the toes. It's very easy to stand up. We're designed to stand because you just put the center of gravity between your heel and the ball of your foot. People who are flat-footed, who don't have an arch, if you're really flat-footed, it can be difficult to stand up to get that balance. We are designed to stand upright, uniquely designed. But secondly, we have this really stiff lever, and we even have a special feature under our foot, a ligament that tightens up the arch automatically. It's one of the things that stiffens the foot, and it's that feature, that plantar fascia, that ligament at the bottom, that's what I copied last year. If you look at my paper in the Journal of Biomimetics, we were the first lab in the world to copy that feature of the human foot. The human foot even has a suspension system. You might have wondered, why do you have the fibula, the little bone in your lower leg? If you ever break your fibula, what you'll notice is that your foot becomes unstable because it's like a car suspension system. It guides your ankle joint. As you pronate, it's controlled and supported by forces from muscles on the fibula. It's like a car suspension system. You really have to be a mechanical engineer to understand how the foot works. This is one of the problems the evolutionist has. Most of them don't have, hardly any of them, have an engineering background. They don't understand how the leg works. And then function 4 is strength. What I love about this picture is that it shows efficient compression load paths shown by the different colors. But what I find astonishing is God has put the bones in the exact place that enables them to perform 4 different functions. Not only do the bones form the 3 arches, but incredibly, God puts the bones in such a place that they also produce these compression load paths. This is why God is such a genius, that he can, with one set of bones, perform so many different functions. You need to study and get a PhD just studying the foot to appreciate the fine mechanical design that goes on in the human foot. There was a study recently in ETH, top university in Zurich. The conclusion: humans are far superior to robots. Often we hear supposedly how wonderful robots are. Well, robots will never enter the Olympics for BMX or skateboarding. This is what happens to a robot when they try and get on a skateboard or a BMX. They fall over very quickly. You cannot match God's design. I want to just briefly talk about answering bad design arguments. In America in particular, students are being given this book, Human Errors, a panorama of the bad design in the human body. Nathan Lentz is a biologist at City University, New York. He's not a full professor, he's an associate professor. He hasn't studied biomechanics, which shows, but he claims the biomechanics of the human body is all wrong. And sadly, this is what students are being taught today. And I've published and given lectures in the United States speaking against this person, saying this person is teaching really bad, really terrible science. Let me just give you some example. Nathan Lentz says this: the ankle can do nothing but malfunction. Nathan Lentz obviously hates God. He hates Psalm 139. He wants to say to the world, Psalm 139, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. He wants to tell the world that verse is wrong. He wants to tell children and students that verse is wrong. But in so doing, he makes a number of catastrophic scientific statements that are completely wrong. So he says the ankle could do nothing but malfunction. Sports scientists and biomechanics know, studies have been proven, that when you have a problem with your ankle or your knee, it is not because of the design. It's the way you use it. Sometimes it's to do with arthritis or disease. It is not to do with the design. In this particular paper, it said running is rarely associated with an ankle sprain. The risk factors are training in the wrong way, doing the wrong thing. If you crash your car into a lamppost, you cannot blame the designer of the car. It is the way you are using your car. This is what Nathan Lentz doesn't understand. So in another part of his book, he says the ankle contains 7 bones, most of them pointless. They would function better as a fused structure. Now, this author hasn't researched in biomechanics, but the whole of the human body says, it's a mess, it's wrong. Why does he say this? Well, I've said one of the reasons is he hates God. One of the reasons he says these things is because evolution predicts bad design in the human body. That is what evolution predicts. And therefore, children are being taught today, the human body is terrible design from head to toe, it's a mess. Because that's what evolution predicts. But science is showing that the human body is brilliantly designed, which is condemning the theory of evolution. Let me just give you some quotes from a top medical text, the internal ankle joints are extremely important for pronation. And I could list 100 quotations that you should not fuse your ankle bones unless you really have a serious problem like terrible arthritis. And as soon as you fuse them, you lose your function. In Birmingham, Royal Orthopaedic Hospital, walking on rough ground is difficult after a fusion. Most people cannot play vigorous sports like squash. That would be a disaster. After a fusion, I could quote you hundreds of statements that you should not fuse your bones. And yet Nathan Lentz, his book is full of terrible scientific statements, erroneous scientific statements, which is really sad because this book is being given to students and children in schools, brainwashing the children into thinking the human body is badly designed. This is why the work of Christian values in education, truth in science, is so important, because evolution destroys good science. It's not just brainwashing them in a philosophical way, but it's ruining science at the same time. Finally, I want to briefly talk about Darwin's iconic homology argument. If you remember from your school time, or if there are students here at the moment, you will know this is one of the the classic evidences for evolution. This is what inspired Darwin to write that book in 1859, Origin of Species. He said, "Isn't it curious that the skeletal layout of the human arm, the horse leg, the whale flipper, the turtle leg, the frog leg, the bird wing, isn't it curious? They all have a shoulder, an elbow, a wrist, and fingers." And Darwin said, that proves evolution. That was his iconic argument. And this is shown to children around the world today. This proves evolution. Because if you read a biology book, it'll say what Darwin said. You would not expect a whale flipper to have a wrist, an elbow. You just wouldn't expect that. You would not expect that. Or you wouldn't expect the bird wing to have a wrist and an elbow. So it must be to do with evolutionary ancestry inheritance. Crucially, Darwin never justified that claim. And all the biology books since the time of Darwin have not justified the claim. The biologists have just said you wouldn't expect a wrist in the flipper of a whale. You wouldn't expect an elbow and fingers. No one has ever justified it. Over the last 20 years in particular in my biomechanics research, because I've researched most of these limbs, I have thought Darwin made a catastrophic error in his assumption. Who says that a whale does not need a wrist and fingers? I think they do. And I've spent 20 years researching why birds and whales do need a wrist, do need fingers, do need an elbow. Just before I explain, a couple of years ago, someone dissected a whale flipper. And if you dissect a whale flipper, underneath you will see fingers. And evolutionists around the world said, why would a whale need fingers in the flippers? This proves Darwin to be right. Children are correctly told this is an evidence for evolution. Well, I've done research over the last 20 years showing that whales absolutely need fingers, exactly as you see them there. Whales need fingers. Whale flippers need wrists. They need all of what you can see in that diagram. And I've developed this paper with 52 diagrams showing how every finger and thumb and wrist, it all needed in the whale. And I found various scientific articles to show that they have found and proven that the muscles in the fingers and wrist of whales are fully functional and explained by optimal design. So Darwin just assumed, I can't believe a whale needs fingers, and he's been copied. And I have shown He's totally wrong. Whales do need fingers, do need those flexor, because this relates to my talk. A whale does need the flexor muscles, and it does need the extensor muscles, because when a whale swims, it needs to fine-tune the shape and the stiffness of its flippers for hydrodynamic efficiency. To give you one example, when a whale is swimming, if a whale swims fast, the forces on the flippers go up. And if it doesn't stiffen the flipper by stiffening the muscles and the fingers and the wrist, the flippers will just deform and the drag coefficient goes up and the hydrodynamic efficiency goes down. So when you study the hydrodynamics of swimming and maneuvering, you then discover the whale does need its fingers and its wrists and all the muscles in the flipper. Of course, Darwin didn't understand engineering, and nor did the biologists writing these books. So earlier this year, I submitted my paper to a top journal, the Institute of Physics. And my dream was to write, have a title, Universal Optimal Design, the title in defiance of Darwin. And I assumed it would be rejected. It's a really weird feeling to work on something for 20 years thinking it'd just get ignored. Well, 1 month ago, it was accepted and published in the Institute of Physics. You can look it up. The title, in defiance of Darwin, is Universal Optimal Design in the Vertebrate Limb Pattern and Lessons for Bio-Inspired Design. And in the conclusion, I say this: the great versatility of the vertebrate limb pattern challenges the limb homology argument. And earlier I explicitly say of Charles Darwin that the skeletal layouts of the whale flipper and birdwing are not what would be expected for those applications and make sense only when seen to be a consequence of evolutionary inheritance. That is what every child is taught around the world in GCSE and A-level biology. This paper argues that the vertebrate limb pattern is so versatile, so brilliantly designed, that it is actually highly optimal, not just for arms and legs, but also for flippers and wings. All the musculoskeletal structures of the flippers and wings are actually fully functional and fully explainable in terms of optimal design. If you read the paper, it's 15,000 words and 52 diagrams, but if you read the paper, it actually shows all of these diagrams showing in detail why a whale needs an elbow, wrist, and fingers. This has been downloaded already 1,300 times, already causing a bit of a stir. So this is really encouraging. I did not think they would allow that through. It was quite a process through the reviewers, but it is in defiance of what Darwin said and what every biology book has been claiming. The homology argument was supposed to be the only one that they had confidence in, and I have shown it to be completely wrong. I had one other encouragement earlier this year, because when I wrote this paper, I thought, well, I'd also like to write a paper about the multifunctioning ability of the foot and the wrist and the knee joint. Like I was talking, this incredible multifunction ability, and I want to write that up and send it to another journal and say, this is a great challenge to evolution, because the multifunctional aspect is a great evidence of irreducible complexity. And 3 weeks ago, this also got accepted and published by the Journal of Biomimetics, How Multifunctioning Joints Produce Highly Agile Limbs. And in that paper, I said this: complexity in biological systems is sometimes labeled as an emerging property. However, it is very difficult to explain how a multifunctioning system could emerge from an initially single-functioning system. Therefore, multifunctioning in biological systems, such as limb joints, presents a major challenge of irreducible complexity for evolutionary biologists. And that was published 3 weeks ago. And I heard 2 days ago, it won the Best Paper Award for out of 73 papers in that issue. So that was a great encouragement. Very grateful to the Lord for that. If you go back to Genesis 4, it's wonderful how God gifted certain families with farming skills, musical skills, engineering skills, showing that God wants us to use our hands for skill. I told you, according to evolution, our hands are here to punch. According to evolution, the reason we have a voice is to scream. The human voice is the most incredible musical instrument, and yet, if you're in state education, you will be told, if you can sing, that's just a coincidence. Actually, you were evolved to scream. How uninspiring is this worldview? How important to have a Christian worldview. And isn't it incredible? The one who designed those pinnacles of creation, pinnacles of mechanical design, his hands and feet were nailed to a cross. When he designed those incredible structures, he knew what would happen to his own hands and feet. What a picture of mercy and grace, that in a way the pinnacle of creation was nailed to a cross out of mercy for us. If we trust in him, we can then have that complete redemption, that hope of heaven. If you want more details, you can look at my website, profstuartburgess.com. More details on the papers and other aspects of the talk, but do encourage you to look at these two particular books, The Wonders of Creation, written with Andy McIntosh, and my most recent book, The Gift of Sport, How Sport Reveals the Wonder of the Human Body. If you're short of Christmas presents this year, this would make a good evangelistic present to your friends and neighbours. I wrote that with my daughter, Tabitha, who's very keen on sport as well. But I hope you find that encouraging and really revealing the importance of organizations like Truth in Science and Christian Values in Education. There is such a real battle for truth today. So let's pray for protection for our children and to make headway in that battle. Thank you.
Is there a brave person amongst the room who would like to ask a question? Because I do feel Stuart's come all the way from Bristol and has all that knowledge. We can surely ask him something. Oh, there is. There he is. David.
Hi, thanks for that. That was really interesting. Really interesting talk. With the publication in the IOP journal and the biometrics journal, are you sensing like an increased cynicism against traditional evolutionary teaching in schools and in science and among your peers?
The first part of that question, I didn't catch the whole question.
Sorry. With the publication in the IOP journal and in the biometrics journal, are you sensing an increasing cynicism against traditional evolutionary teaching among your peers and just generally among the, like in the universities, among students and in schools and so on?
Okay, yeah. So the short answer is yes. But I want to clarify that in my over 30 years in academia, one of my biggest surprises is academia is not full of atheists. And in particular, if I speak to my biomechanics colleagues, sometimes it's a bit disappointing. I say, can I just convince you there's intelligent design here? And they say, just stop. You don't need to convince me. You'd be preaching to the converted. It's obvious there's intelligent design here, even though they have no religious agenda. It really has surprised me, particularly amongst biomechanics, people who study the human body. Most academics are agnostic. It's a minority of atheists who are very vocal and quite bullying. But a lot of academics tend to be a bit kind of lazy. They don't want to put their head above the parapet. So many of my colleagues would be very sympathetic to intelligent design. My biomechanics colleagues I say to them, have you seen this book by Nathan Lentz? And they say, yeah, it's full of rubbish. That's what they think. And yeah, evolution, that makes no sense at all. But they don't want, it's only a small number of people who actually teach the theory of evolution. It's a very tiny number who teach it and research in it. Most academics will say, yeah, the theory of abiogenesis, the idea that life came from a chemical soup, that's rubbish. I've spoken to senior biologists who would admit there's no evidence for that. It's rubbish. And if evolution can't start, then the whole theory flops. But they're not prepared to say that to the media. So in private, there's always been great cynicism, skepticism for many aspects of the theory of evolution. You could then ask, well, why is it taught as a fact in schools? There's a clear answer to that. Humanists UK do all the lobbying for evolution to be taught in schools. It's not lobbying by scientists, it's lobbying by humanists. That's why it's taught as a fact in schools. But if I speak to my colleagues, including the biologists, they'll say, yeah, children are being misled. They're being told you can have abiogenesis, life emerging from a chemical soup. Scientists don't even believe that. The evidence is totally against it. And macroevolution. So sadly, children are being very misled with even what scientists actually believe. And it's because of the lobbying of the humanist societies.